The legal notice sits on my kitchen counter. 67 pages. I don't need to read past page 3 anymore. My parents are suing me for $900,000. That's the number that makes people gasp. That's the number that breaks families. That's the number they think will destroy me. But here's what they don't understand. I already know everything. And I'm not the scared girl they raised. That girl died 3 months ago. What's standing in front of this window now is something entirely different. My name is Caroline, and this is the story of how my family became my enemy, and how I learned to fight back with nothing but the truth and the patience of someone with nothing left to lose. It started before I understood it was starting. That's how betrayal always works, doesn't it? You're living your life, thinking you're safe, thinking the people who gave you life actually care about keeping you whole. I was 28 years old, working as a legal paralegal in a mid-size firm in Minneapolis. Not glamorous, not particularly well paid, but stable, honest. Mine, I woke up at 6 in the morning. My apartment was a 1-bedroom in Northeast, nothing fancy, but it had good light and the landlord didn't ask questions. I had a routine: coffee, shower, work clothes that said professional without screaming for attention. By 7:30, I was in my car, driving down I-35, listening to podcasts about unsolved crimes and corporate fraud. I know how that sounds now. Prophetic, maybe. Or just the universe whispering a warning I was too naive to hear. My parents lived 15 minutes away in the neighborhood where I grew up. Wayzata. The kind of place where people don't talk about money problems. They talk about their vacation homes and their children's colleges and the latest renovations to their kitchens. My father, Richard, had a consulting business. At least that's what he called it. Business consulting. Whenever I asked what that meant, he'd wave his hand dismissively and say it was too complicated to explain, that I wouldn't understand the nuances. My mother, Patricia, had been a housewife for 30 years. She volunteered at church. She did Pilates 3 times a week. She had a perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. They seemed fine, normal. The kind of parents who called on Sundays and asked how work was going in a way that sounded like they already knew the answer they wanted to hear. I visited them for dinner the 2nd Thursday of every month. It was a rule, unspoken, but absolute. My mother would make something she'd spent the afternoon preparing. My father would ask about my job in that patronizing way that suggested he didn't actually believe paralegal work was a real career. My younger brother, Michael, came when he wasn't traveling. He worked in finance. They were always more proud of him. I could see it in the way they asked him questions, the way they actually listened to the answers. But I was used to that. I'd been used to that my entire life. You get numb to these things, or you think you do. That 2nd Thursday, March 14th, my mother made osso buco. She'd learned the recipe from some chef at a cooking class she'd taken in Scottsdale. Everything in my mother's life was curated from somewhere expensive. She poured wine and asked about my cases with that practiced interest that meant nothing. My father talked about a new golf membership. Michael laughed at something on his phone. And me? I ate. I smiled. I played the part of the grateful daughter who was just happy to be there, even though nobody ever asked me if I was happy. Nobody asked if I was tired. Nobody asked if there was something wrong. Looking back, I can see the signs. The way my mother kept trying to steer the conversation toward my finances. How are those savings doing, Caroline? Are you putting anything away? My father watching me like he was calculating something. Michael being unusually quiet, which meant he was uncomfortable. They already knew, I think. Or at least they were preparing themselves to know. Collusion doesn't happen all at once. It builds slowly, like sediment in water. You don't see it until you're drowning. 3 weeks later, I got the phone call. It was my mother. She sounded like she'd been crying, though she denied it. Caroline, we need to talk. Your father wants to see you this weekend. At the house, there's something we need to discuss. When parents say that, it never means anything good. I felt it immediately, that tightening in my chest, the instinctive knowledge that something was wrong. But I said yes. I always said yes. I showed up Saturday morning. The house was quiet, too quiet. My father was in his study. My mother was in the kitchen, pretending to reorganize the spice rack. That's what she did when she was anxious. She touched things repeatedly, rearranged them, found comfort in the illusion of control. My father stood up when I came in. He was wearing a pressed shirt and slacks, like we were meeting for a business deal. In a way, I guess we were. "Sit down, Caroline," he said. His voice had that edge to it. The one he used when he was about to tell me something I wouldn't like. I sat. My mother stayed in the kitchen, but I could hear her. She was still touching things. Need to tell you something, and it's going to be very difficult, my father said. He put his hands on his desk. They were shaking slightly. I remember noticing that. Richard Carlson's hands never shook. 2 years ago, I made some financial decisions. They were not appropriate, with a client. A substantial amount of money, approximately $72,000. I didn't say anything. I was waiting for him to tell me why he was telling me this. Client has become aware of the situation. They're threatening legal action. They're demanding reimbursement, and they want the money within 30 days. 60,000 at first and then the remainder. "Okay," I said slowly. "That's a problem. What are you going to do about it?" He looked at me for a long moment, and in that moment I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Desperation. Not regret. Not shame. Desperation. The look of someone who knows they're in trouble and believes they've found a way out. "We need you to loan us the money," he said. The words didn't make sense. They didn't arrange themselves into a sentence my brain could process. "Excuse me? We need you to loan us the money. We'll pay you back, of course, with interest, within a year." I thought he was joking. Genuinely, for a moment, I thought this was some kind of test. Richard testing to see if I was smart enough to recognize an insane request. But the way he was watching me, waiting for a response, made me understand that he was serious. "I don't have $72,000, I said. It was the truth. I had maybe $15,000 in savings, $15,000 that I'd been accumulating since college. "You could take out a loan," my mother said. She'd come back from the kitchen. She was standing in the doorway like a ghost. "A personal loan or refinance your apartment. You own it outright, don't you? You could tap into the equity." I did own my apartment. My grandmother had left it to me when I was 22. It was one of the few good things in my life, the one thing that was completely mine. "Absolutely not," I said. I stood up. My hands were shaking now. "I'm sorry, but absolutely not. This is not my problem. This is your problem. You committed fraud. You need to fix it." My father's face changed. That desperation transformed into something else. Anger. "You don't understand the situation, Caroline. This man is serious. He has connections. Do you understand what I'm saying? He has connections." "You threatening me?" I asked. "Are you threatening me with someone else's connections?" "I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining reality. Our family's reputation is at stake. Your brother's career could be affected. Your mother's standing in the community." "Your reputation," I said. "That's what this is about." "Your family," my mother interjected. "We're asking you to help your family." I looked at her. At this woman I'd spent my entire life trying to please, trying to impress, trying to be good enough for. "I'm helping myself," I said. "That's what I'm doing. I'm helping myself." I drove home in silence. I didn't cry. I wasn't the crying type. But I felt something breaking inside me. Not my heart. That's what people always say, like it's surprising when your family hurts you. Hearts break all the time, but something more fundamental. Trust. The foundational belief that the people who raised you wouldn't weaponize their love. That they wouldn't ask you to sacrifice your own security for their mistakes. I didn't hear from them for 2 weeks. Then the lawyer's letter came. Not a personal letter. A formal legal notice on official letterhead. They were suing me for breach of a verbal contract to loan them money. The amount had somehow become $900,000. They claimed I'd promised to loan it to them, and I'd reneged on that promise. They wanted $900,000 plus legal fees plus pain and suffering damages for the emotional distress caused by my refusal to help. I read it 3 times. The number didn't change. It was always $900,000. Showed it to my supervisor at the firm, Marcus. He was a real lawyer, the kind who actually understood legal ethics and justice and all those concepts that people assume lawyers care about but mostly don't. Marcus read the letter and whistled low. "That's amateur hour," he said. "This suit won't hold up in court for a second. You don't have a verbal contract. They have no witnesses, no documentation, no consideration for the loan. It's a harassment suit dressed up in legal language. So they can't actually win?" I asked. "In court. But they can make your life very difficult. They can tie you up in depositions. They can demand discovery. They can force you to hire a lawyer and spend money and time. It's a pressure tactic. They're hoping you'll break and give them the money just to make it stop." But I wasn't going to break. However, what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that they weren't actually trying to win. They were trying to destroy me. It started with phone calls. My mother calling at midnight, crying, saying Richard had had a heart attack, that he was in the hospital, that I needed to come immediately. I drove to the hospital at 2 in the morning. There was no heart attack. My father was fine. She just wanted to see me. When I asked why she'd lied, she looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. Then came the social pressure. My mother called the mothers of my college friends. Apparently, I was refusing to help my parents in their time of need. Apparently, I was selfish, ungrateful, the kind of daughter who abandoned her family. These stories spread through the neighborhood, through her church group, through the small ecosystem of people who mattered to my parents. I'd become a villain in the narrative they were constructing. My brother Michael got involved. He called me at work. His voice was cold in a way it had never been before. "You're embarrassing the family. Do you understand that? People are asking me questions. People are asking if everything's okay." "Everything isn't okay," I said. "Mom and Dad committed fraud and they want me to cover for them." "They didn't commit fraud. They made a mistake, and now you're refusing to help them. What does that make you?" "Responsible," I said. "It makes me responsible." He hung up. The worst part was that the suit was working, because even though it didn't have legal merit, it had emotional merit. Every time something went wrong in my life, I wondered if it was connected. A guy I'd been seeing stopped texting me. Was it because someone had told him about the lawsuit? I didn't get a promotion I was expecting. Was it because my boss had heard the rumors? My confidence was rotting from the inside. I was becoming paranoid, fractured, unsure of myself. My therapist at the time, I'd started seeing a therapist in April, suggested that I was experiencing gaslighting, that my parents were systematically trying to make me question my own reality, that they were using social pressure and emotional manipulation to destabilize me. "Trying to convince you that you're the bad guy," she said. "They're very good at it." I took 6 weeks off work. I barely left my apartment. I sat on my couch and read the legal documents over and over again, looking for something that would make sense. Some logical explanation for why the people who created me were trying to destroy me. But the only explanation was the simplest one. They were willing to hurt me to protect themselves. By August, I'd hit bottom. I was sitting on my kitchen floor at 2 a.m, having just hung up after another phone call with my mother. She told me I needed to understand their perspective, that I was being cruel. That family was supposed to support family, that I was breaking her heart, and that's when something shifted inside me. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was the opposite. It was a moment of absolute clarity. I stopped crying. I stopped trying to understand. I stopped expecting anything from them. And in that emptiness, something new started to grow: cold focus, strategic thinking, a plan I started with Google. I created a new email address, carewins83@gmail.com, using a name that had nothing to do with me. I used my phone's VPN, even though I knew I probably didn't need to. Paranoia, maybe. Or just a new understanding of how the world actually worked. Trust was naive. Caution was intelligent. I pulled up my parents' financial records. I still had access to some of them because I'd helped them organize their taxes years ago. I'd asked to keep the passwords just in case I ever needed to help again. They'd said yes, laughing, because they'd never imagined I'd turn that access against them. The first thing I found was a bank account in my father's name that my mother didn't know about. I found the monthly statements in a folder on the shared cloud drive. Deposits from consulting clients, withdrawals to restaurants and hotels, all meticulously listed, all documented. I downloaded everything. I created a new folder on my external hard drive labeled tax documents. I watched the files accumulate, thousands of pieces of evidence. A paper trail that led directly from my father's fraud to the lawsuit he'd filed against me. Then I called a lawyer, not Marcus. Someone from outside the firm, someone with no connection to my family. Her name was Sandra Hull, and she specialized in fraud cases. I went to her office on a Friday afternoon. I brought the hard drive. I brought the legal documents. I brought copies of text messages and emails. I brought the story, laid out chronologically, with dates and amounts and details. Sandra was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been disappointed by people for decades and had made peace with it. She read everything carefully. She asked questions. And then she did something that nobody else had done in 6 months. She believed me. "This is significant," she said. She was looking at a bank statement. "This account. Your father has been moving money into it for years, and based on these withdrawal patterns, he's been hiding it from your mother." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means that even if his claim that the money was stolen is true, his financial behavior suggests premeditation, planning. This wasn't an accident, Caroline. This was intentional." She pulled out a notepad. Her handwriting was aggressive, angular. "Here's what I think is happening. Your father has been defrauding clients. He's gotten caught. Instead of taking responsibility, he's trying to blame you for his financial problems. If you give him the money, that doesn't solve his problem. It just enables the fraud to continue, and it protects him by making you complicit. What do? I asked. You document everything, she said. Every conversation with them, every email, every piece of evidence. You build a case, and then you have options. What kind of options? She looked at me for a long moment. That depends on how far you're willing to go. I started recording calls with my parents. I learned that Minnesota was a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record a conversation as long as I was part of it. I bought a digital recorder from an electronics store. I set it up before calling home. The first recording was with my father. I called him on a Tuesday evening. "Hi, Dad," I said. My voice was steady. I'd practiced it multiple times. "I wanted to talk about the money situation." There was a pause. He sounded confused. "The lawsuit. The one where you're claiming I promised to loan you money that I never promised to loan you," I said. "Yes, that one." "Caroline, this isn't the time." "Actually, I think it is. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm wondering if maybe we should go back to the beginning, to when you first asked me for the money. Can you tell me what happened from your perspective? What made you decide to ask your daughter to cover up your fraud?" "That's not what happened," he said. His voice was getting louder. "I explained a difficult situation and asked for help. You refused. You asked me to commit wire fraud," I said. "You asked me to borrow money under false pretenses to give to you. That's a crime, Dad. That's not a difficult situation. That's a crime. You don't understand the business world, Caroline. You don't understand how things work." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I work as a legal paralegal. I understand fraud. I understand what you did. And I understand why you're lying about it." He hung up, but I had the recording. 23 minutes of him alternating between charm and coercion. Between acting like a victim and acting like a predator. The duality was stunning. Within the same sentence, he could be pitiful and threatening. I recorded my mother the next day. The conversation was different but equally damning. She used emotion as a weapon. She cried. She asked me if I hated her. She claimed her health was suffering. "Your father isn't sleeping. I haven't been able to eat properly. You're killing us, Caroline. You're literally killing us." I listened to the recording 3 times. The theatrical quality of it was breathtaking. She was performing rather than actually connecting. Every emotion she expressed was designed to manipulate rather than communicate. I saved all of it. I sent it to Sandra via encrypted email. She called me the next day. "These are excellent," she said. "Your father essentially confessed. Your mother is demonstrating emotional manipulation and duress. Combined with the financial records, this is a strong case for a countersuit." "Against my parents?" I asked. The words felt surreal. "If that's what you want." I spent September gathering more evidence. I hired a forensic accountant who specialized in fraud cases. His name was Tom, and he was meticulous to the point of obsession. He went through 15 years of my father's financial records. He found the offshore account. He found the payments to accounts that didn't match any legitimate business. He found the money trail. "Your father has taken approximately $340,000 in fraudulent income over the past 15 years, Tom said. He was sitting in my apartment, his laptop open, showing me charts and graphs. "This isn't a one-time mistake. This is a systematic pattern of fraud." "What about the $72,000? I asked. "That's the amount that got exposed, but it's not the only amount. There are similar patterns with different clients, different time periods. It's possible that the $72,000 was just the client who got brave enough to confront him." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My father didn't just commit fraud. He was a career fraud artist. The mistake wasn't that he did it once. The mistake was that he got caught. In October, I filed a complaint with the Minnesota Department of Labor. The documents went through officially. Unofficially, Sandra had me provide everything to the FBI field office in Minneapolis. I met with Special Agent James Chen on October 18th. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of careful expression that suggested he'd heard thousands of stories and didn't believe any of them until he had proof. "This is substantial," he said, reviewing my documentation. "How long have you been gathering this information?" 3 months, I said. "And your parents don't know?" "No," he nodded. "That's smart. Can I be candid with you, Ms. Carlson? Your parents have been lucky. They've been committing fraud for years and nobody's caught them. If you'd given them the money, it would have bought them time. More time to defraud more clients. More time to hide the evidence. You refusing to help them might have actually saved future victims from losing their money." "That's not why I did it," I said. "I wasn't trying to be noble. I was being honest. I know, he said, but it's a consequence of it. By mid-October, my parents didn't know they were under federal investigation. They thought they were winning. The lawsuit was moving forward. They'd filed motions for summary judgment, trying to fast-track a ruling that would prove I'd promised them the money. Their evidence was primarily character witnesses, my mother's church friends, people from their social circle, testifying that I came from a loving family and would naturally help if I'd actually promised to do so. What they didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything, that I'd turned over thousands of pages to the FBI, that forensic accountants had been combing through 15 years of their financial lives, that Special Agent Chen was building a case that would make the lawsuit seem like a minor inconvenience. I stopped trying to defend myself in the lawsuit. Instead, Sandra filed a countersuit, not for the $900,000, but for malicious prosecution. For intentional infliction of emotional distress, for fraud, for coercion, for abuse of the legal system, and then she served them with a request for discovery. I was at work when Sandra called me. Your father's lawyer just called. He's panicking. Discovery is going to force your parents to turn over all of their financial records, which they know contain evidence of fraud. They're in an impossible position. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait, she said. But your father is going to have to make a choice. Give up the financial records to the court, which means his fraud becomes part of the public record, or refuse to comply, which means he goes to jail for contempt of court. My father chose a third option. He tried to destroy the evidence. I found out because Tom, the forensic accountant, flagged suspicious activity on the offshore account. Money was being withdrawn suddenly. Bank statements were being deleted. Someone, almost certainly my father, was attempting to move money and eliminate the digital trail. I called Sandra immediately. She called the FBI. Within 12 hours, a federal judge had issued a freeze order. The account was locked. My father couldn't move the money, and by trying to hide it, he just increased the severity of the charges against him. Special Agent Chen called me on November 3rd. We're moving forward with the investigation, he said. We have enough evidence to recommend charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and attempted destruction of evidence. I wanted to give you a heads up before the notification process begins. Your parents will be contacted. They'll need to surrender to the field office for processing. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel anything, actually. Maybe that should have concerned me, but I'd learned something important over the past 6 months. Numbness was a survival skill. The arrest happened on a Wednesday morning. Federal agents came to my parents' house at 7 in the morning. I wasn't there, but I heard the details from my brother Michael, who called me, his voice tight with something between rage and despair. They arrested Dad, he said. They arrested him for fraud. There are federal agents everywhere. They seized his computer. They froze his accounts. I know, I said. There was silence. Then, you did this, I said. Dad did this. I just stopped protecting him. You reported them to the FBI, Caroline, our parents, your family. They reported themselves to the FBI, I said. The moment they decided to commit fraud, they made that choice. I didn't make it for them. He hung up. I didn't expect him to call back. The week before Thanksgiving, my parents' lawyer contacted Sandra. They wanted to talk about a settlement, about making the lawsuit go away. Panicking, Sandra told me. We were in her office. Had a satisfied expression, though she tried to hide it. Your father's facing serious federal charges. Your mother's being dragged into it as a co-conspirator. They want an exit. What do they want from me? I asked. They want you to drop the countersuit. They want you to sign an NDA so you can't talk publicly about what happened. And they want to keep the settlement amount confidential. Absolutely not, I said. I'm not signing an NDA. I'm not taking a settlement. I want this public. Sandra smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Trial was scheduled for early March. But before we got there, something happened that changed everything. Michael called me. He sounded different, broken. Need to tell you something, he said. I've been helping them, Dad and Mom. I've been hiding money for them, moving it between accounts. I didn't know what I was doing at first, but I knew I was helping them hide money. I didn't say anything. I'm turning myself in, he said. I'm going to cooperate with the FBI. I'm going to testify about what I helped them do. I asked, why now? Because you were right, he said. And I hate that you were right. I hate that I spent my whole life trying to be the good son, the successful son, and it turns out I was just a criminal too. So I'm going to be honest, finally. That's when I cried, not for my parents, but for my brother, for the fact that this family had twisted all of us into people we didn't want to be. The federal trial began on March 14th. Exactly 1 year after the dinner where my mother asked about my savings, the prosecution presented evidence for 3 days. Financial records, expert testimony, bank statements, my recordings, Tom's forensic accounting. Every piece of evidence carefully cataloged, professionally presented, legally airtight. Michael testified on the 4th day. He was wearing a gray suit that made him look older than his 32 years. He described how he'd helped his parents, how he'd known it was wrong, how he'd been too afraid to say no. My mother cried during his testimony. My father stared straight ahead. When it was my turn to testify, the prosecution was brief. They just needed me to authenticate the recordings and explain the circumstances of how I'd gathered the evidence. I did. My voice was steady. I didn't look at my parents. The defense didn't cross-examine me for very long. Their case was weak. They were trying to argue that my father had made a mistake, that he'd been overwhelmed, that he was a good man who did one bad thing. But the evidence showed that he'd been doing bad things for 15 years. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. I was sitting in a coffee shop when Sandra called me with the sentencing recommendation. My father was facing 60 months in federal prison. My mother was facing 36 months. Michael had already cut a deal. 18 months with a recommendation for minimum security. It's over, Sandra said, but it wasn't. Not really. A month later, I was standing outside the courthouse where the civil trial was scheduled to begin. The lawsuit against me, the one asking for $900,000. My parents had tried to continue it, even after the criminal verdict. Their lawyer, the third one they'd hired, as the previous 2 had quit, was arguing that the criminal case and the civil case were separate matters. But the judge dismissed it in 40 minutes. The summary judgment came down on a Tuesday afternoon. My parents had no evidence. The lawsuit was frivolous. They had to pay my legal fees. I received a check from my parents' lawyer a month later. $27,000. Reimbursement for Sandra's time. For Tom's forensic accounting. For everything I'd spent trying to protect myself from people who were supposed to protect me. I deposited the check and didn't think about what to do with it. On a Tuesday evening in late April, about 3 weeks after the sentencing, I got a letter in the mail. Not from a lawyer, from my mother. She'd written it in her careful handwriting, the same handwriting she'd used on my birthday cards for my entire life. Caroline, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know you probably don't want anything to do with me, but I need you to understand something. We didn't see what we were doing as wrong. We saw it as survival. Your father was losing clients. The business was failing. We were afraid of losing the house, afraid of what people would think. We made a choice based on fear, and that choice hurt you. I can see that now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that. Love, Mom. I read it 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. But I also wasn't willing to pretend that a letter made the truth disappear. It didn't. The truth was that they'd tried to destroy me to save themselves. And they'd failed. 6 months later, I was sitting in my office at the law firm when Marcus called me into his office. I thought maybe he wanted to discuss a case. Instead, he offered me a promotion. We want you to specialize in fraud litigation, he said. You've clearly got an instinct for it, and based on what happened with the Carlson case, you have a personal investment in victims getting justice. I took the job. 2 years later, I'd won 7 fraud cases. My clients were people who'd been victimized by family members, business partners, people they'd trusted. I understood their pain in a way that most lawyers didn't. I understood the particular cruelty of betrayal from someone you loved. I also understood that understanding pain doesn't mean being destroyed by it. It means transforming it into something useful, into justice, into prevention, into a way of making sure other people don't have to experience what I experienced. My parents went to federal prison on a Tuesday morning. My father in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. My mother in a minimum security facility in West Virginia. Michael served his time in a facility outside of Minneapolis. I didn't visit any of them. I didn't write letters. But I also didn't stop being their daughter. Coldness isn't the same as cruelty. Distance isn't the same as hatred. I just learned to love them from a place where they couldn't hurt me anymore. The apartment my grandmother left me, the apartment they'd tried to force me to mortgage, was the place I built a new life. I painted the walls. I filled it with books. I created a space that was entirely, completely mine. And on the days when I was prosecuting someone like my father, fighting for someone like me, I thought about what I'd learned. That betrayal has a particular shape. That manipulation is a skill. that gaslighting is psychological violence. But I also learned that truth is a weapon. That evidence is power. That sometimes the greatest revenge isn't a moment of dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's simply being the person smart enough, strong enough, and patient enough to know exactly who hurt you and prove it in a way that destroys the narrative they told themselves about being good people. I'm Caroline Carlson. I'm a lawyer who specializes in fraud. I'm a daughter of criminals, and I'm a living example of what happens when you underestimate someone you've been hurting all along. The reckoning wasn't an explosion. It was a quiet, methodical, perfectly documented dismantling of everything they thought they could get away with, and it was worth every sleepless night.